Good morning, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. This morning we will be reading from the Canki Sutta. So I'm going to post a link to Majjhima Nikaya 95 in the comments. So feel free to click that link from Sutta Central. And I will be reading from Bhakti Sujato's translation. And before we begin, we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. So as mentioned this morning, we are going to be reading from the Canki Sutta. Since it's a very long sutta, we'll go a little bit midway. So essentially the sutta begins with a Brahmin who has heard of the Brahmin Canki, who has heard of the Buddha. And the Brahmin Canki is a Brahmin who comes from clearly a Brahmin caste and is very knowledgeable, has a very good pedigree. And so all his Brahmin friends discourage him from going to see the Buddha because they say that it's actually the Buddha that needs to go and see the Brahmin Canki since he was so high and very well respected. But then in the end, essentially, since this is not going to play off, and the Brahmin Canki was also allocating all the good qualities of the Buddha, who was not a Brahmin, but was from the Katya class, so the second down, right, from the original caste system that there was already had been established basically back then when the Buddha came into being. So then the Brahmin Canki goes with a bunch of other Brahmins to go and see the Buddha. And at a certain point, then one of the Brahmins that is going there with Canki asks this question to the Buddha. And here's where we're going to start, and it's around halfway through. And so here we see the Brahmin Kapatika that addresses the Buddha and says, Master Gautama, regarding that which by the lineage of testament and by canonical authority is the ancient hymnal of the Brahmins come to the definite conclusion, this is the only truth, other ideas are silly. What do you say about this? So the Brahmin here obviously is talking about the Vedas, right? He's a master of the 3 Vedas. So he is asking the Buddha his reflections in terms of what he thinks, what is his reflections in terms of defining this as truth, since it is the belief of the Brahmin caste that this is in fact, that they are holding truth. And the Buddha replies, well, Bharadvaja, is there even a single one of the Brahmins who says this? I know this, I see this is the only truth. Other ideas are silly. Or actually how Bhante Bodhi translate this, only this is true, everything else is wrong. And the Brahmin replies, no, Master Gautama. And the Buddha says, well, is there even a single teacher of the Brahmins or a teacher's teacher or anyone back to the 7th generation of teachers who says this, I know this, I see this is the only truth, other ideas are silly? No, Master Gautama. And then the Buddha continues, well, what of the ancient seers of the Brahmins, namely Attaka, Vamaka, Vamadeva, Visamitam, Yamadagi, Angirasa, Bharadvaja, Vasita, Kassapa, and Bhagu? They were the authors and propagators of the hymns. Their hymnal was sung and propagated and compiled in ancient times. And these days, Brahmins continue to sing and chant it, chanting what was chanted and teaching what was taught. Did they even say this? We know this, we see this is the only truth. Other ideas are silly. No, Master Gautama. And so here the Buddha is pointing out essentially that this truth that the Brahmins are calling truth has been passed on from Brahmin to Brahmin, who are all very well respected. And he's asking the question, does any one of these Brahmins actually seen this truth, seen personally that this is actually true, right? Have they claimed that they've seen this actual truth beyond actually just passing it on, transmitting it? And so since the Brahmin replies no, the Buddha says, so Bharadvaja, it seems that there is not a single one of the Brahmins, not even anyone back to the 7th generation of teachers, nor even the ancient seers of the Brahmins who say, we know this, we see this is the only truth. Other ideas are silly. Suppose there was a queue of blind men, each holding the one in front. The first one does not see, the middle one does not see, and the last one does not see. In the same way, it seems to me that the Brahmin's statement turns out to be like a queue of blind men. The first one does not see, the middle one does not see, and the last one does not see. What do you think, Bharadvaja? This being so, doesn't the Brahmin's faith turn out to be baseless? And the Brahmin replies, the Brahmins don't just honor this because of faith, but also because of oral transmission. And the Buddha replies, first you relied on faith, now you speak of oral tradition. These 5 things can be seen to turn out into different ways. What 5? Faith, endorsement, oral tradition, reason, contemplation, and acceptance of a view after consideration. Even though you have full faith in something, it may be void, hollow, and false. And even if you don't have full faith in something, it may be true and real, not otherwise. Even though you have a strong belief in something, something may be accurately transmitted, something may be well contemplated, something may be well considered, it may be void, hollow, and false. And even if something is not well considered, it may be true and real, not otherwise. And here we hear some echoes also of when the Buddha essentially teaches to the Kalamas, right? The Kalama Sutta is very, very famous sutta where the Buddha essentially gives us a list, like he's doing here in the Canki Sutta, of different reasons why we can believe what we are believing, right? So there's different ways through which we say only this is true, everything else is wrong, right? Either we have very much faith in something, right? Or maybe it's the oral tradition. It's a tradition that has been passed on. Perhaps we are born into a family, right, that has been religiously practicing something. It doesn't matter what it is. So obviously here the Buddha is talking to a Brahmin, but I think the most interesting part is not necessarily about the faith of the Brahmin, but rather what the Buddha is pointing out is the reason why the Brahmin is saying only this is true, everything else is wrong. And so each one of us should be actually considering that, even if we're actually born Buddhist, or if we're born Christian, or if we are born whatever we're born into, and we are perhaps taking those teachings on faith, right? So without just taking it on, saying, okay, only this is true, everything else is wrong. Acknowledging, okay, so I really have faith in this. So this is the truth that I'm taking out of faith, or this is the truth because I'm taking it out of oral tradition, right? It's a tradition that has been passed on very specifically, obviously, within the Brahmin caste. There was a very good, there is still actually to this day, an incredibly detailed way of transmitting the teachings so that one could be sure that they were actually the same as they were taught back in the day. So for millennia, actually, the Brahmin caste has been holding these teachings, right? Specifically. So we have the faith in that oral tradition of transmission. And then the Buddha says, maybe one has a strong belief in something, or it's something has been well contemplated or well considered. So maybe we take something on through logical inferences, so it really makes sense, right? We're like, okay, this has a sort of flavor of truth, right? This kind of really, if I think about it, really, really makes a huge amount of sense. Or something, we take it on because we actually just like it, right? We're like, okay, I like this kind of view of the world. For a lot of us, perhaps convert Buddhists, there can be a lot of logical inference. When one starts analyzing the teachings of the Buddha, actually they make a lot of sense, right? This is what got me personally actually interested in the teachings of the Buddha. I was like, wow, this logic is actually quite impeccable. So there is something very interesting about how you can't find any fault really in the logic of these teachings. So that's what brought me to go like, okay, this is true, right? And then start this process. But the Buddha says that we should consider that if we actually haven't experienced the truth that is brought over, it doesn't matter if it has been passed on through oral tradition, doesn't matter if we have faith in it, doesn't matter if it makes sense through logical inference, it doesn't matter if we like it or not, and so forth. But rather, we have to understand that if that is our basis, well, then we can discover that actually, it's false, it's void, or we can actually, we might be right. It's kind of like a 50-50 sort of bet in each one of these, right? The logic might be faulty even. We're just not, we can't see it right here, right now. And so the Buddha says, then comes to the point which we're going to talk really about today, is the preservation of truth. So he says, a sensible person who is preserving truth, for a sensible person who is preserving truth, this is not sufficient to come to the definite conclusion, only this is true, everything else is wrong. And so the Brahmin asks, so Master Gautama, how do you define the preservation of truth? And the Buddha replies, if a person has faith, they preserve truth by saying, such is my faith. But they don't yet come to the definite conclusion, this is the only truth, other ideas are silly. If a person has a belief, or has received an oral transmission, or has a reasoned reflection about something, or has accepted a view after contemplation, they preserve truth by saying, such is the view I have accepted after oral transmission, reflection, or after contemplation. But they don't yet come to the definite conclusion, this is the only truth, other ideas are silly. That's how the preservation of truth is defined by Bharadvaja. I describe the preservation of truth as defined in this way. But so very, very important, right? The Buddha is here highlighting how do we get essentially closer and closer. And we see this is actually essentially fundamentally the continuum of the sutta is from preserving truth, becoming essentially the necessary condition to then actually accessing truth. But the preservation of the truth is something that is very accessible to us right here, right now. And that basically is qualifying every time why we hold why we're saying something, do we think that something is true. And so it's not about questioning or having no view whatsoever, or not holding anything right even the Dhamma perhaps as something precious, but rather it's qualifying the reason why we hold that stance. So this creates a flexibility of the mind where we're not, whenever our truths, so to speak, are challenged, we don't have that kind of strong resistance towards anything that might actually change that truth, right? Usually if we're atheists and someone believes in God, for example, we'll have a very strong reaction to it. If they're like, oh, actually there is God, or like, no, it's not the case. Or vice versa, if we actually really believe in God and someone is atheist and challenges that idea that God exists, then we're like, no, God exists, only this is true, everything else is wrong. But rather, like, the suggestion is to understand, to like really look into why we are saying what we are, taking that stance, whether it's atheism, whether it's theism, or whether it's polytheism, or whether it's nibbana, it doesn't matter the subject of the truth that we're holding. But what is important is the acknowledgement or of what that truth depends upon. Until we actually see that truth, until we actually have an experience of that truth, until we know that truth for ourselves, right? And then that's where we are basically going to the steps that are elencated further in this sutta with Canki. But everything, like the actually coming to the truth, is based upon the preservation of the truth. So always going, okay, I actually hold this view. For example, rebirth, I don't have an direct experience of rebirth in terms of like an understand, like I know it for sure, I see it for sure, but I can say that I have taken this truth of rebirth either out of logical inference, either out of faith, either out of oral tradition, either out of like, actually, I like this, concept of rebirth, whatever it is, the motivation. But the qualifying aspect then is always good to give it context. So it's also, I was reflecting actually a lot, and a lot of times we say the Buddha said this, the Buddha said that, the Buddha said this. Maybe we should also always qualify it, right? According to the suttas, the Buddha said this, or according to the Vinaya, the Buddha said this, or according to my teacher, the Buddha said this, or according to, I don't know, the temple or such and such, the Buddha said this. And so when we add, once again, this qualifier, then we are not holding too much on that in a wrong way, but rather we are taking in that information, taking in that as a working hypothesis. And investing good time with it. But if that, what we thought was a truth, reveals to be not the truth, and we are exposed to the actual real truth, then we'll have a flexible mind who can take on the actual truth, that can correct what has been, taken on before, and without a difficulty, essentially, without a distress. And then this will make, once again, for a flexible mind, for a mind that attains awakening. So these are some reflections. Actually, also, I'm thinking about right now, what comes to mind is also actually, if I remember correctly, Saka, the way that he has essentially, at a certain point, he talks about engaging in discussions and conversations with others. And he never tries to defeat the opponent, right, with his views, but rather he's always kind of, the highest of the devas always has that like kind of flexible mind of going like, well, let me understand where this person is coming from. Why are they holding the view that they're holding? Is there any actual truth? Is there any actual basis towards it, instead of rejecting it immediately? And so when we have that, for example, sort of attitude towards others, then we will be able to actually have a dialogue with them, instead of have a sort of hostility that then usually, debates can very much immediately stir the mind, and we can kind of get in our positions. Even us monastics, actually, usually that's since the beginning of this time. Actually, it says even in the suttas, the householders kind of have fights for objects, and monastics have fights for non-physical objects. But it's a similar thing, right? We can just get, oh no, like the Buddha said this. No, 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 I think the Buddha said this. No, 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 like get very much into fighting. Oh, the bodhisattva path is the right path. No, the Arahant path is the right path, and like get very much without actually making real progress. So these are just some thoughts on preserving truth. So at this point, if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to type them in the chat. Hello to Gita, that is checking in. Luisa, Chitapala, oh, long time, good to see you. Manal, Bhumika, hello. Spook, Gombu, Amaranta, good to see you. Namo Buddham, John, Miguel, Pamela, and Sud, good to see you all, friends. So I don't see any questions or comments for the time being, so I'll give it a few more minutes. Otherwise, maybe it's okay for the morning. Just a brief announcement that next week we will have again Ayya Soma from Thailand leading this morning sutta study. This morning she was not able to make it. So I can't see any questions coming in. So maybe that's all for this morning. And thank you all for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning. May you all be well, happy, and peaceful. And we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.